Deep Purple's iconic song Smoke on the Water is steeped in iconography because of its riff, but did you know this fascinating story that ultimately inspired the title? Look, we all know that there are few songs as commanding as Deep Purple's Smoke on the Water, but equally there are few songs that have such an interesting backstory to them. And while this iconic 4-note riff may ring around homes across the entire world, it was actually inspired by a very real building, the Montreux Casino, and the fire that happened there in 1971. It was a night when Frank Zappa and the Mothers were playing a show there. Now we all know that his music was deliberately provocative and emotive, relishing the idea of freaking out the neighbourhood and encouraging his fans to do so wherever they can. He was a serial supporter of all things subversive, a jester of rock and roll if you will, but on December 4th in 1971, things took a nasty turn. So Zappa and the Mothers took to the stage that night at Montreux Casino to play their brand of esoteric rock. Playful and poised, the set was a magical ride until one deranged fan moved through the crowd and let off a flare gun right at the stage. The venue's heating system then exploded, leaving several fans sadly injured, the band's equipment completely destroyed, and the venue in smouldering ruins. It was almost as if musical fate had intervened because there were several bizarre reasons as to why no one actually lost their lives in the fire that day. The first reason being that the show was actually in the afternoon that day, so there was less people in attendance. The second was that there was no chairs in the auditorium, and the last was that Ansley Dunbar's drums malfunctioned, causing the remaining crowd members to actually leave in disappointment. So it became this bizarre night of musical tragedy and luck. Tragedy that this iconic venue had burnt to the ground, but lucky that no one was seriously injured or lost their lives. But then, in a bizarre twist of musical fate, it was Deep Purple who were in the area at the time, seeing the fire take place, and then giving birth to one of the most iconic rock and roll songs in music history. And if you listen closely to the lyrics, it all begins to make sense as to how it contextualizes with this historic event. We all came out to Montreux on the Lake Geneva shoreline to make records with a mobile. We didn't have much time. Frank Zappa and the Mothers were at the best place around, but some stupid with a flare gun burned the place to the ground. Smoke on the water, a fire in the sky, sings Ian Gillan on the rock anthem. The track goes on to make a note of many real-life things that happened in Montreux that night, including the actions of a man named Funky Claude, who was somewhat of a musical legend at the time. Funky Claude was actually Claude Nobbs, the director of the Montreux Jazz Festival, who was found that night rescuing children from the blaze. And so this backstory sparked an idea in bassist Roger Glover's mind, who came up with the song title in a dream whilst imagining the fire cascading onto Lake Geneva from the casino. It was probably the biggest fire I'd ever seen up until that point and probably ever seen in my life, said Glover. It was a huge building. I remember there was very little panic getting out because it didn't seem like much of a fire at first, but when it caught, it went up like a fireworks display. So with the backstory, the song title, and their proximity to what happened in Montreux that night, Deep Purple found themselves writing an iconic, fiery rock and roll track. And it all hung on that riff, delivered by Ritchie Blackmore on that Fender Stratocaster, that he later then claimed was inspired by Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, saying that he actually owed the classical composer a lot of money. It's this vision of intensity and this powerful imagery that was perfectly reflected in the music of this track that propelled it to the top of the charts all over the world. But maybe after all of that, they have a bizarre Frank Zappa fan to thank.